بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام ورحمة الله. So I'm going to be sharing with you some information about this national study that the FYI is conducting. It's called iBelong. It's a pilot study, meaning it's not a big old study to do everything. It's going to take a small slice, a small sample of people, understand what we can from it, and from there we're going to extrapolate and work on the next steps, inshallah. And the goal of the study, as you can see from the title, is to increase our youth's belongingness into the masajid. Because we recognize that increasingly youth are feeling disconnected from the masjid. The whole phenomena of unmosqued is increasing. So to understand this, we first start off to understand what reality our youth are in right now. And if you were in the previous session, I used the same slide, so it's the same thing. But if you weren't, I'll just briefly go through this. So on the left-hand side, you see some of the stats on Muslim college students, some of the activities that they're engaging in, right? Whether it's premarital sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling, etc. Very heavy use. And these are Muslim college students, right? This is not like a general everybody. It's just Muslim college students. When you give them an anonymous survey and say, feel safe to answer the question openly and honestly, this is what they'll tell you, as opposed to perhaps verbally they may tell you something different. So you've got a lot of the Muslim-specific stressors, if you will, our Islamic values that we're saying you should be following, which are not stressors, they should be values to guide you, but a lot of times they feel their stratus. On top of that, you've got the regular adolescent level changes that they're growing through. Teenagers are growing physically, biologically, psychologically. You know, the brains don't fully develop until you're in the late teens and the early 20s. And the front part of our brain is the last part of the brain to develop. And that's the part of the brain that really helps us in making a lot of decisions. So risk calculation is done by the front part of the brain. And that's the last part of the brain to develop. So you see young people doing a lot of risky activities. And sometimes you're like, what are you, nuts? Why are you doing this? But physically, they're just not able to process that information. They're just physically not developed yet. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And then on top of that, a lot of times, unfortunately, we do not provide the proper support or belonging either at home or in our communities. That then adds up on top of all of these other challenges that end up being these lifelong challenges sometimes. And hopefully they're transitional, but sometimes they become lifelong challenges. So what's this project? We've got 3 phases to this project. One, we're going to do a needs assessment, which means we're going to identify barriers and opportunities for a sense of belonging in the masjid. You have to understand the problem first before you can try and address it. And once you understand that, then you can try to intervene. We will design and implement, evaluate a PYD-based workshop. PYD is positive youth development. And in the previous session, I talked a little bit more about the building blocks of positive youth development and how we're utilizing this within our communities. And then once you've developed that intervention, then phase 3 is actually disseminating it back into the community so that we can all implement it in our communities effectively, saying, oh, you know what, this is what we found in our studies, and from an Islamic perspective, this is a good way for us to proceed to help our youth increase their belongingness to the masajid, inshallah. And this really fits in very much with the FYI's public health model. The FYI is a research and education nonprofit. So we engage in primary research, we engage in original research about the Muslim community, and then we go about and educate our community about those issues. And the way we do that, we have this 6-step process. First, you have to identify there's an issue. It could be us identifying it. It could be a community member coming up. It could be an imam coming up and talking to us, hey, I see these issues. And then for us to recognize, like, is this just one community? Is it a one-off issue? Or you find like 20 different imams across the country are coming and asking us, lots of different community members in a convention like this from across the country are asking us the same questions. Like, this seems to be a national phenomena here. We need to understand this better. So we have to identify what are those issues that are impacting us. And once you've identified, then you've got to research it. What are the factors that are affecting this issue? What's causing that issue to happen? Once you understand those, then you can look for solutions. Third step, what works and what does not work. And that goes into going into the literature and finding, sometimes we think we're really unique. At some level, we're unique. We're Muslims. But many of us are immigrants. Many of us are born and raised here. There's a lot of studies that have been done on different immigrant communities. There's lots of studies that have been done on different minority communities. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn and we can implement in our own community. And you you add on top of that specific things for the Muslim community. So you collect all of the solutions that have been shown scientifically to work within our Islamic guidelines. And once you have these solutions, you got these technical articles full of jargon. Most of us are not going to be able to read that. So you got to create resources, infographics, videos, lectures, workshops, articles that people can actually understand, digest, and implement in their lives. So that's the resource development. Once you develop the resources, it's no good sitting on our shelf. We got to pass it on to you. And so that's the implementation stage. We hope you take it with you and you implement it. And as you're doing that, being a research organization, we want to understand the impact it had. Did it work? Is it useful? If it's not working, if it's not useful, we got to change how we do it. And so you go through this process over again. So for the iBelong project, we needed a large enough sample that would help us, again, statistically speaking, a large enough sample that would help us identify the nature of the problem, but not so big that it gets out of hand. It's a pilot project. So we are working with 6 representative pilot communities across the country. And within each one of these communities, we're working with the adolescents, the young people themselves. We're working with parents. We're working with mentors, those who work with youth, and then the mosque leadership, whether it's the board, the imam, the director, whoever it is, because all of them play a role in what experience the young people have in their community. And so some of our community partners, we've tried to go across the country. We just listed a bunch of logos there so you can see who they are, but our criteria would be, we wanted folks on the East Coast, we wanted folks on the West Coast, in the South, in the North. You wanted urban communities, suburban communities, those are potentially more immigrant focused in terms of their the attendees, those that are not immigrant focused. So you've got all of these different criteria that allow us to make sure that whatever analysis that we get out of this actually applies to the community as a whole. It's not like we picked a couple of communities and they are so different than everybody else as you're like, hey, this is not going to apply to me, right? So it has to be statistically valid. Our step 1 within our phase is we did a survey. We did a survey of young adults, not adolescents. Our goal is to study adolescents. So we surveyed young adults and asked them, what worked for you when you were in that phase? When you were an adolescent, when you were a teenager, when you were in high school, what made you connect to the masjid and what pushed you away from the masjid? So we're asking them what's going on. And then once we collected our data, we analyzed it, and then we had this data confirmation webinars. We went back to each of the communities and said, this is what our analysis is finding. And now we're talking to the teenagers themselves and said, this is what the older folks are saying, that as a teenager, these things worked and didn't work. Do they work for you or not? We want you to confirm this analysis is sound. And then, of course, we're going to do further interviews. We're not in that process yet. We'll do further interviews with each one of these representatives to figure out what works, what does not work. So we asked the question, and this is the data that I want to share with you guys. Think back to your belongingness as an adolescent at your local masjid. What made you feel like you belonged at the mosque? And what made you feel like you did not belong at the mosque? That's the exact question that we asked. And here are the reasons why they said they belonged. It was multiple choices that you could pick simultaneously, so it's not going to add up to 100%, right? You could tick off a bunch of things. But the biggest factor that youth listed that they felt that connection to the masjid, interpersonal relationships, interpersonal interactions. They had this positive interaction that when they went to the masjid, the imam was always so kind and welcoming and always talking to them, making them feel part of the masjid. The uncles and the aunts and the elders, the other teenagers, it was a welcoming community. And that connects to the second one, community connection. I felt connected to the community as a welcoming community. And then together with that, you have the spiritual connection, you got the programming, meaning I felt, I went there to pray. I went there for that increase in spiritual needs. And the programming was good too. Identity part was low. It's not like, I'm hanging around because everybody else is a Muslim. Yeah, that's nice, but I can hang around Muslims elsewhere too. And here's a quote. I had a lot of Muslim friends I would hang out with. A lot of my people my age would go, and everybody was nice, the interactions. I felt happy when I went to the masjid. All right. Why did they not feel any belongings to the masjid? Guess what? The number one factor is also interpersonal interactions. Yeah, the reason I left the masjid, I don't like going to the masjid, is that uncle's always yelling at me. Dude, that aunt's always picking on me. And those people, they're always saying stuff. I can never do anything right. I'm always doing things wrong. The interpersonal connections are both a positive and a negative. Identity differences and discrimination. SubhanAllah, it's amazing. I remember going to a masjid. I gave a khutbah about unity, brotherhood, and it was not the general generic. My things always are very fact-based and specific action items and so forth. About we need to increase the interaction in our masjid, etc. I used to live in that community. I moved. One of the brothers, dark-skinned, came up to me and said, people just do not respond to my salams in my masjid. He's a board member of the masjid. I'll leave it at that. We discriminate. Our children learn from us. And I'll come back to this in case I run out of time. There's a very high degree of correlation between parents' behavior and children's behavior in terms of these values. You think your children are not picking up? When you look at who the parents are hanging around with, the cliques that they work with, that, right after Salah, if you're at the mimbar, you can see, all right, this group of guys, they go hang out, say salams, and then this group of guys goes and say salam. All right, it could be friendship circles, no problem, but then there could be something more going on. And our children are reflecting a lot of that. There's a lot that's happening there. So here's some direct quotes. The adults were judgmental and always waited for young people to make mistakes. Like, the young person's feeling like somebody's just waiting for me to make a mistake and they're going to pounce on me. People get mad at me when I make mistakes. I felt disrespected. I did not speak Arabic like the other kids, and I got discriminated against. So I felt like, I'm not going to go to the masjid for this. Interpersonal connection is the number one factor that will make or break our masjid connection. You got to add on top of that the spiritual connection. That was the number two. You want to be connected spiritually to the masjid. A loving, accepting community that helps me get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I like learning at the masjid. It's relevant to me. So yes, programming is important. Programming will bring people to the masjid. I was just speaking to a mother right after my first session, and one of her challenges is like, I can't get my kids, teenagers, to the masjid. And then I asked her what type of programming, and then she's like, yeah, it's not the most exciting. And I was like, well, you got a challenge right there. You can't force your children. At some level, if you're forcing your children to go attend a program that's not so great, you're almost going to cause a break from their masjid connection. They'll go as long as you force them to. As soon as they have a choice, they're going to walk away from the masjid. So instead of forcing the children to go to the masjid there, work with the masjid folks to change the programming so it's more relevant, more attractive. And if you're not able to do that, what I suggested to her was at some level, supplement that at home. The pandemic, with all of its challenges, was also a blessing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does everything for a reason. We have learned all of these online resources and the way we work with them. So for at home, for us, I've got 3 kids. We started doing, we've always been doing it, but we do halaqas at home. And every year in Ramadan specifically, we always pick, one series. Every sheikh has a series that they do online in Ramadan. There's so many of them available. Say, all right, you know what? We're going to watch that. Sound knowledge coming from teachers that you trust. But don't just watch it. Then sit down and discuss. What did you learn from it? What did you get out of it? and so on and so forth. So build that spiritual connection that they want that knowledge, they're hungry for that knowledge. And the fact that the masjid is not so great, it's like, all right, maybe this masjid is not it. As they get older, they can go to a different masjid or something else. But you want to build that connection, inshallah. One of the things when we did the data confirmation webinar, meaning we collected the data, we presented it back to the young people, one of the very interesting quotes we got, as a result of the Zoom call, we got our voices heard. I felt respected and appreciated for our opinions. They felt this, just the fact that we took a survey, the fact that we asked them in a webinar of all things, not even in person because we couldn't go because of the pandemic. We asked them, hey, what do you think? Young person, a 14-year-old said, you know what, it's one of the few times in my community people actually asked me what I think. And you actually are listening to me. And you actually value what I have to say. This is just amazing. Mind blown. If we were to just replicate and do that a little bit more, our young people would feel a lot more connected to the masjid. We'll be doing one-on-one interviews, going through a whole process set up by the National Research Council and Institute of Medicine. There's a whole methodology on how to do all this stuff. So it's a 3-year process. We're still in phase 1, finishing up. We got delayed because of the pandemic. Then we'll be doing phase 2, inshallah, and then we'll do a phase 3. If your masjid or anybody else wants to participate, if you want to get along, scan that QR code, inshallah, and we'll be happy to update you on our results. And if at some point down the road, I'm assuming we'll do the roadshow, come back to each community and help everybody learn from what we have learned and what we can implement, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.